Welcome, everybody. My name is Anthony Monta. I'm the Associate Director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies here at Notre Dame. This is our fall film series. The theme is disintegration. I'm very delighted to present our speaker this evening. He is a graduate of Notre Dame back in 1968. Majored in English, was a friend of the fellow who endowed this very building that we're sitting in tonight. He also has a deep interest in history, which is going to come up in just a second. Mike Carroll has spent his career mainly as a photojournalist, but it's really much more than that. He has worked for the Boston Globe, various Condé Nast publications, Disney, Pixar, speaker companies, Harvard Medical School. He's functioned as a film story consultant for a range of... So he's been on all kinds of assignments all over the world. And one trip around the world in particular was to Romania after the fall of the dictator there, Nicolae Ceausescu. We're going to hear about that in a second, but I just want to put Mike and the film in a little broader context here. One of our earlier films this semester, which I hope some of you were here for, was about the cultural sort of situation in Romania around 1835. That is, about 155 years before the action that you're going to see in this film. This was on the eve of the Romania as a kind of nation state. It was a historical picture and talked a good bit about the polyglot culture of Romania at the time, or at least dramatized it. It's a very complicated history in a very complicated place. This film takes place, of course, much, much later, just after the fall of Ceausescu's regime in 1980. Do I have it? 89? 89. Okay, so that was the sort of putative integration of Romania as a communist country, but as we know, the dictatorship was anything but an integration. Right? So you had this huge surface depth problem. How do we understand this? It's supposed to be this integrated place, but if you start looking underneath, what is the reality of this? It looks very, very different. What I'd like to emphasize is that Mike has spent a long time looking at things through the lens of his camera, but also outside of the lens of his camera, and asking, because of his interest in history, which I hope was created here at Notre Dame, asking the best of all possible questions: why? Why is what I'm looking at the way it is? And it would have been easy for him to parachute in, look around, take some photos, get a t-shirt, get out, maybe distribute a few dollars of good here and there, but what happened was something totally different. Mike took a very deep dive into Romania and its culture, and in a place where things are so complex that, as he says in his book, it takes a village to give directions. He kept cultivating relationships, kept going back with great modesty, learning all the while, and over time established tremendous social trust with the people in Romania, which enabled all kinds of good things to happen. And one of them is the organization you're going to hear about tonight, the Romanian Children's Relief Foundation, which he founded and which has gone on to grow and expand, serving now, approximately 1,000 children, but I'm sure it's more than that, 3,000, since 2010, 1,000 was the figure in 2010, so this is a really extraordinary story, what you're about to see, and it exemplifies, I think, what culture means when we come to think about global affairs. So Mike has been very gracious today to meet with students in English, film, peace studies, economics, neuroscience, journalism, and he's been gracious enough to be with us here now. So please welcome back Mike Carroll.
So, unfortunately you came. One of the things you should never do in your lives is agree to be the subject of a film. It is the most excruciating thing I've ever done in my life, to be analyzed by somebody who thinks they know who you are. Now, I do that for a living, so I'm pretty good at that, but being on the other side of the camera has been really difficult. And it's been hard in many ways, especially when you look at this film. I saw this film 5 years ago, and I haven't seen it since. And there's a reason for that. When you see it, you'll see the reason. I'm in it. And I got into it in a really weird way. I'm a freelance photographer. I have many different kinds of clients, and one of my clients is the Disney Corporation. And the man who, I didn't do the film, first of all. Everybody assumes that I did the film, which I didn't. And also that I work for the Boston Globe, which I don't. I'm a freelance photographer, so I work for actually who will ever pay me. And I do corporate editorial work, mostly magazines. And now I'm old, so I kind of mostly go to Florida as much as possible. But I had done this day in the life of Don Hahn, who you may know or may not know. He did Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, Roger Rabbit. I can't go on. Hunchback of Notre Dame. He did. He was head of Disney Animation, and when he was doing one of his films, I was hired to spend a day with him and follow him around and annoy the hell out of him, which was really a lot of fun, actually. And his way of getting back at me was to asked me for the pictures that I took of him that day. And he said, well, you're in Los Angeles a lot, which I am. He said, well, let's go to lunch. So I went to lunch. I figured, well, if Disney's paying for lunch, I'm going. At lunch, Don told me he had just left his position or resigned from his position as head of animation. Now, when I photographed him, Roy Disney was still there, and he was head of animation, and then Don became head of animation, and then eventually John Lasseter became head of animation. But none of these names, Disney might mean something to you, but the others don't mean that much. So anyhow, we're at lunch, and it's kind of like, oh, Don's telling me about his life, and it's Hollywood. So in Hollywood, everybody tells you about their life. So I'm listening to him about his life, and I'm going, oh, yeah, that's cool. He's an accomplished painter, musician. I mean, he's really just one of these people that's incredibly talented, who went to a junior college. So listen, no knock on Notre Dame, but junior colleges are pretty good places. He says, after about a half hour of this, he says, so what do you do besides take pictures? And I said, well, I play golf and play basketball on Wednesday nights, and and I do a lot of different things with my neighbors, and I drink, I go out to dinner, and I go to Romania. And he said, Romania? Who goes to Romania? And I said, well, I go to Romania. And he said, well, where is Romania? And actually, you'll see me say that in the movie. And so then I told him where Romania was, and I told him what we were doing and why I was going. And the 1 hour lunch ended up being almost a 3.5 hour lunch. And at the end of it, we shook hands and parted company. And he says, I'm changing my life. I'm actually going to do something different. I'm tired of making cartoons. Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, but those are pretty hefty, heavy-hitting cartoons. So I am doing a long-term project myself personally on the Salton Sea. So I was out to the next day to the Salton Sea, and I get a phone call from Don, and he says, I want to do a documentary. I've spent in our conversation earlier, he had told me he'd watched 300 documentaries over the last year and a half, and felt that he was ready himself as a producer, director, artist to do a documentary. And he just did one called Waking Sleeping Beauty, which if you've never seen is one of the best documentaries ever about Disney. It's all about the making of Lion King, and it's really good. It's a very revealing documentary. So I said, well, okay, you could do one on our foundation and the children and everything, but I don't really want to be in the movie. And he says, oh yeah, okay. So I thought, okay. So I called my wife. I said, what do you think? He says, well, I'm going to have to interview. He tells me that I'm going to have to interview your wife, and I'm going to have to interview your children, and and your executive director, and we'll have to go to Romania to do stuff. And I said, well, okay, fine. So just as long as I don't have to be in it. And he said, yeah, no problem. So I call everybody, and they all agree. Oh, let's do it, because we'd already been approached by 2 film directors in Europe and one in the United States to do a film about us. So, well, at least I trust this guy because I photographed him. You know, he makes these nice maquettes, and he did Lion King. How could you be a bad guy if you did Lion King? All right. So, I mean, better, you know, great music, you know. So, I agree. And the next thing I know, about a week later, he says, oh, actually less than that. It was like 5 days later. I'm still in California. He says, let's have dinner. So we have dinner. He says, you know, I have to tell you that every movie needs a protagonist. I said, oh, yeah, good idea. He says, and you're it. And I said, what? You're going to put me on film? You know, I'm bald, I'm old, I'm a little fat, you know, I mean, I don't want to be, and you're going to be with me all the time? He says, well, but we can't tell the story unless you're in the story. By this time, my wife and my executive director, Eileen McHenry, they're all so gung-ho, so I ended up agreeing with this proposition, and I ended up being in the movie. So I apologize to all of you that, you know, we were going to have somebody else. You know, Matt Damon was going to play the part, but he actually opted out. And I got stuck playing the part. So I'm not going to go any more detail about it because that's what the movie's about. So anyhow, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I want to thank the Nanavit Institute. I think I said that right. The Nanavit Institute. Did I say it right? Yeah. Okay. Institute and all the wonderful people I've met at Notre Dame. I didn't know it was such a nice place. Thank you for inviting me.